Yes.
So this is prayer meeting, so it's interactive. What I'll do is I'll go along with my notes, and as I'm talking, it's kind of a bit like a study, but still interactive, a bit like Sabbath, where we interact and things. And as I go along, my notes are right on the board, but then we'll just discuss it, and if you've got anything to add, and I will ask some questions as well. So don't be afraid to get anything wrong like that, just because it's recorded. It's just to help everyone, because this is sort of, it's a new subject to me, to be honest, and it was not easy to get my head around. I don't know if that's because I've not been feeling myself the last couple of days, or whether it's just, you know, the US and, you know, everything. So, you know, everything to do with the courts and, you know, the government, it's not easy to understand for us people in the United Kingdom. Well, for me anyway, speak for myself.
Natalie, the board is slightly, if you, we can't see the bottom as much as we could now. That's better. Oh, whoops, not too much. Yeah, that's good. That's good there. Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah.
So it's the overturning of Doma. Can somebody tell me what Doma is?
Okay, so Doma is constructed of 3 sections. The first one just explain what it is.
You just give me the name. What does DOMA mean?
Defense of marriage act, I believe.
That's all I wanted for now. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. Right, let me just get the notes. So this was overturned how long ago? Does anybody know? The Defence of Marriage Act.
2015?
No.
14?
No, it was 9 years ago.
But that was only the first part of it. Then there was the
that's a bit. We're starting from there first, and then we'll go into the other dates that you mentioned.
So
all right.
First part was 2012.
So it was 9 years. It's 9 years
13.
ago, like you said, 2013. Yeah. But what I wanted to talk about was, I think it was over. I think the Defence of Marriage Act, basically, it was passed when was it passed? Let's not talk about overturning. When was it passed? The so-called Defence of Marriage Act, DOMA. Anyone remember the year that it was passed through Congress? No one remember?
Was it 1996?
Yeah, it's a significant year for us, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why is that? Why is 1996 significant for us?
Was that the formalization of the message or the?
Yes,
sorry, what did you say?
yes, that's right.
Okay.
Someone said 1996, was that Emma? Sorry, I'm on my floor in my bedroom, so it looks strange.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was passed by who? There was a president who passed it in 1996. Do you know who it was?
Bill Clinton.
And so it was signed by Bill Clinton. So, the Supreme Court struck down, and if we go back for a minute, so the Supreme Court overturned Doma Act, which meant what? What did it mean when it was overturned? Does anyone know? And who was it overturned? Who were the subjects? So it was about same-sex couples that were legally married anywhere in the United States. So when the Doma Act was overturned, it meant that they could now protect their protections back that, you know, heterosexual couples had, and they never. Do we agree on that? So the overturning of Doma Can anyone think of what kind of things that the same-sex couples what they got back when it was overturned that heterosexual couples had? What benefits? So basically they had protections. The same protections as heterosexual couples, so same sex. I'll put SSM for same sex marriage as I'll just put straight couples. What other benefits did they gain when it was overturned? Anyone know?
Was it to do with financial too?
Yeah, definitely. So they had veteran, so same-sex married couples who are veterans, they have benefits as well. What type of financial benefits, Nidri?
I think maybe about the house, if they had to divide the house, or if they had to
It was housing, wasn't it?
yeah, or maybe the separation.
Yeah. And what about health insurance? So they had better benefits with health insurance as well. And retirement savings. Anything else anyone can think of?
Death.
Yeah, so when they became a widow or widower. Anything else? Social Security was as well.
Yep.
All the things they didn't have. It's quite horrendous, really. So we said that this was brought in 1996. It was brought the act itself, the Defence of Marriage Act, was brought in. I'm just going to clarify where we are at. So it was brought in and signed by Bill Clinton in 1996. He was a bit reluctant to do it, I believe, but he passed it anyway. In the future, he went against it, which is a good thing. And obviously, we know that Hillary Clinton went against it as well, probably in the 2000s. And I think with this, because it was 1996, and as you said, it was a formalisation, it's definitely, you know, it's very significant that this was going on externally in the world. And, you know, it's the start of our increased knowledge and formalisation and the message. We could even call it two streams of information. So I think this would be a bad stream when this act came in of obviously oppression against gender, same-sex couples being married and so forth. So it would be, I think it's the HIDCL. So we will think about two streams. It's quite amazing it was in 1996. So I think it defines marriage. It defined marriage for federal purposes as a union of one man and one woman. and allowed states to refuse to recognise same-sex marriages granted under the laws of the states. So that's what they define this, the Marriage Act that was signed into Congress in 1996. They said it was no, marriage is about one man and one woman being married. So I think it was Magda talked about a part of that was struck down in 2000. Was it 2013, Magda?
Yeah, so it was put to Supreme Court 2012, but it was taken down 2013. It was decided.
And do you remember what section that was?
Yeah, so that was first one was the third section.
Yeah,
I think so. So Doma. So the
section 3 was struck down.
So the third section is that federal government doesn't have to accept or recognize gay couples gay couples who were married in different states. Where the second section is that the state.
We'll go into the second in a minute. What did the third section do?
The third section says that federal government doesn't have to recognize gay marriage, people who are married in different states. So
yeah.
Federal government, and that was taken down in 2013.
Yeah. So we basically say that this was a violation of the Constitution. It also, it was because it violated the Constitution because if you could go into it a little bit, it's the Equal Protection Promise that was violated. And also violated the due process Constitution. And it also, I think it violated, can you think of anything else? I'm just writing down. Anything else it violated? The section 3. It violated the fifth.
What's written on the board next to section 3?
2013.
Oh, 2013. Okay, thanks. Yeah.
It also violated the Fifth Amendment. Got my glasses on, I can't see things.
What was the Fifth Amendment?
I knew you would ask that. I have looked into it, but I can never remember. I think it is to do with, if someone wants to Google it, I think it is to do with the Equal Protection Promise or something like that. But if you just put Fifth Amendment and Doma and see what it says, I always forget. So if we just go back over to, if anyone gets the answer to that, let me know.
Yeah,
so I just want to, yeah.
Okay, sorry, yeah. It says the Fifth Amendment, according to the Fifth Amendment, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So it's all to do with due process of law, I think.
Yeah, so it's kind of connected to this one. Thanks, Emma.
I mean, I don't know what exactly that means, but yeah.
It says that the part that was struck down by the US Supreme Court is called Section 3, as Magda and I just said. If it prevented federal governments from recognising any marriages between gay and lesbian couples for the purpose of federal laws or programmes, even if those couples were considered legally married by their home state. So I think the federal laws and programmes are kind of these things, the benefits. So they didn't want them to benefit from all the things that heterosexual couples benefited from. It says, as mentioned, the significant part of Doma is that individual states do not legally have to acknowledge the relationships of gay and lesbian couples who are married in another state. So if they were married in another state where it was legal, and then they go back to the state that they live in, they didn't have to recognise that marriage. Said it violated the equal protection promise and the due process. So as Amanda mentioned before, she mentioned section 2. I wanted to just put here before we go into section 2 that it defines this bit here where we talked about when it was passed into Congress in 1996. It was because they defined marriage. I don't like writing on the board. They define marriage for federal purposes as the union of one man and one woman. You can see how from 1996, even Bill Clinton a few years later and his wife, how you know, culture and society became more open to the fact that, you know, they should allow same-sex marriages. It's taken some time now, hasn't it? And it allowed this act that was signed in, as I said, it allowed states to refuse or recognise same-sex marriages granted under laws of other states. To refuse or to recognise same-sex marriage granted under. Because if you've, I mean, I'm sure you've all heard that people years ago, same-sex couples used to have to go out of state sometimes of where they lived to get married somewhere else. Has everyone heard that?
Yeah, I've heard that, yeah.
As a dentist, unfortunately, and we weren't taking much notice of external things, except the 2015 thing with Obama, we kind of, maybe some of us, maybe younger people like doing that and Sophie, and maybe you did notice all these things, but a lot of us were so sort of closed off because of the Bible and what we thought it meant that we didn't recognise what was going on externally in these times. So allowed states to refuse or refuse to recognise same-sex marriage granted under other states. And that was in 1996, and then it was overthrown because it was unconstitutional, and then they started to get the protections back, which was all these that we've mentioned here, and we put here, it was section 3 that was struck down, and why it was struck down: it violated the Constitution, the Equal Protection Promise, and it violated the due process of the 5th Amendment. So that's just a little recap of where we're up to. Magda mentioned section 2, didn't you, Magda? Section 2 of Doma. What does anybody know what that's about? So section 2 was not challenged at the time in 1996. It was not challenged, but it was as we go along in time. But why? What was it? What did it mean, section 2? Anyone know? So section 2, the ruling did not require any state to legalise or recognise the lawful marriage from another state. So like I said, it was this section here that wasn't overturned at the time of this, but Section 3 was. So they got their rights back at this time when Section 3 was overturned of the act that Bill Clinton signed in, but they didn't overturn Section 2, which meant they didn't really, they could say, oh yeah, you know, you can, same-sex marriages can all have these benefits, but we're still going to keep this. It's not going to be recognised. We're going to keep Section 2 of the Act, and you're not required to recognise lawfully marriage from another state. But what happened in 2015 is marked as there. Anyone?
It was overturned.
Yeah. What was overturned, Magda?
Section 2. So that the states have to recognize the couples, the married couples.
Does anyone remember this happening? I mean, we should do. What a president was doing this? Was involved with same-sex marriage in 2015.
Oh, was that? Oh, no, not Obama, was it?
It was.
Yeah. That's a landmark case in 2015 with regards to same-sex marriage. Elder Test brought this one up. Does anyone remember the name? The landmark case. If you were at Sabbath, you will remember.
Obergefell versus Hodges.
Yeah. So Obergefell versus Hodges. Does anyone remember what that was about? It's quite a while since we looked back at that study from Elder Test, isn't it? So in 2015, with the Obergefell versus Hodges case, the court held that same-sex marriage was a fundamental right protected by both the due process, like I've mentioned, clause and the equal protection clause. The ruling of this case required all states to perform and recognise the marriage of same-sex couples, leaving Section 2 of Doma superseded and unenforceable. Someone going to say something then? Someone say something?
I was just going to say no, I was going to say the Obergefell, but you were talking about it. So I didn't know if was it the case where one of them died and he wanted to get inheritance? I can't remember. Actually.
Yeah, that's it.
I think they knew he's going to die, so they get married on the plane.
Oh yeah.
That's
Different state.
Oh, because they weren't legally recognised as married. Is that right?
yes.
Why was that? Was because they were in a different state that still didn't recognise it.
Yes. So did they get on the plane, Magda, to go into a different state to then recognise their marriage before he
I
died?
don't know if I remember right, but I believe so that they did. Went
Yeah.
to a different state, and then he was fighting after he passed away so his marriage is recognized. But with the inheritance, so when the Section 3 was struck down,
Yeah.
that was different couple, and I think they were together for like 44 years. They were married for 40 years, and they wanted tax the person on the inheritance, and so that's where it was the Section 3 taken down with this case. I believe. I don't know if I remember completely well. I'm not completely sure.
Because the Section 2 is about the states, so the states still didn't have to recognise certain states. So, like you said, I think Obergefell and Hodges, their marriage was not recognised, so they were on the plane, and he was dying of cancer, I think, and they went to another state to get their marriage recognised, wasn't it? I think that's if I'm repeating what you said correctly.
So how could? Yeah, that makes sense, but in a way. But how could they get Section 3 repealed? You know, Section 3 is all the benefits. If they weren't prepared to accept marriages at a federal level anyway, so it's only on individual states that recognise them still. But they illegally, everyone had to do the benefits bit.
They got all these benefits back when they struck down Section 3, but Section 2 the state wasn't recognised in certain states still. They didn't have to recognise their marriage.
So
So
presumably
then
the only people that got the benefits were states where they recognised homosexual marriage, because if you didn't recognise the marriage, you're not going to get the benefits anyway. And yet it's a federal law that you get the same benefits, which is crazy, really. So they had to do this bit as well, really, to make it across the whole country, that they could get the benefits, because they'd have to recognise the marriage first to get the benefits.
Yeah.
Otherwise they couldn't apply that benefit law without them recognising the marriage bit first, so that it made sense to put this one as well. But yeah.
Yeah. So in 2013, when they struck down Section 3, saying it was unconstitutional, the Defence of Marriage Act that was brought in by Bill Clinton and Congress in '96. Who was the plaintiff of the Defence of Marriage Act anyway? What case was it? What was the landmark case around this time? Does anyone remember?
Ask again, sorry. What was the
What was the landmark case in 2013? Who took the United States to court with regard to the Defence of Marriage Act? It was a landmark case.
But I can't remember.
It was
Edith Windsor. I just looked.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So the landmark case. Does anyone know who she was married to?
Yeah, I'm cheating, but I can tell you.
Landmark case was. Did you say Edith?
Edith, yeah. Edith Windsor.
The United.
That sounds very English, doesn't it? Windsor.
Maybe she had English roots. Yeah.
United States versus Edith, isn't it? You said.
Yeah, Edith Windsor, and she was married to Thea Spire.
Windsor, yeah.
To who? Ferris.
Thea, Thea, Thea Spire.
So the Supreme Court, so United States versus Windsor in 2013, Edith Windsor led the case against the United States after she was forced to pay over $360,000 in state tax after her same-sex spouse, Thea Spire, died. The federal government did not recognise their marriage, so the IRS said, "We don't recognise your marriage because of the Defence of Marriage Act, Doma. Won't let us," so she had to pay $365,000 in state tax, as I just said, which a straight couple would not have had to pay, which is just awful. Following the ruling of the US Supreme Court, they found that Doma to be unconstitutional, and Windsor's marriage was federally recognised in the state of New York. So when this was struck down, I'm not sure if someone wants to look, I'm not sure if she actually paid that money. And then a little bit later, I'm not sure whether she had to pay that money or not, but I know her marriage was recognised in the state of New York. So that was 2013. Does anyone know if she actually had to pay that money? I think she did, didn't she? So I think she won. Someone's checking. Are you checking, Emma? Check to it.
I'm checking. I'm just wading through some things.
I don't know everything on this study because I haven't had time. Normally take a couple of weeks to do a thorough study, and I've only had 2 days. So say 2 days, a couple of hours at night to work. So basically, I think she won because the ruling of the Supreme Court, as we know, found it unconstitutional. So she must have been living in New York, and they federally recognised it in marriage in 2013. Do you think because Doma was ruled unconstitutional 9 years ago, it made marriage equality legal throughout the country back then?
Repeat that again.
They found 9 years ago, they found it unconstitutional, that we've wrote down here, that,
Yeah.
so do we think that marriage equality was throughout the country?
Do you think that because of that case?
No, when 9 years ago when this was overturned,
Oh, I see.
basically what I'm saying that it's the federal government that only had to recognise the marriages. You remember when I said until we got to 2015, because this is 2013, until we got to 2015 when they struck down Section 2, and then through the Obergefälle, and then states had to recognise other marriages in other states that were from other states. So if they went and got married in one state, came back to where they lived, the state had to recognise. So anyone know about any other benefits that Section 3 gave back to same-sex marriages? Because we've never suffered from any of it. We don't realise how horrendous it was, and for how many years same-sex marriage couples had to suffer. Just trying to think of anything else. So I think it was joint income tax filing, an exemption from federal state taxes, rights to like property, like Cedra said, rights to creative and intellectual property, political contribution and laws affected them as well. It affected children. There was one thing anti-gay activists are constantly, they used to constantly imply that children of straight parents are better off than children of gay and lesbian parents. Usually they claim through the studies that show children do best with a mother and a father. These studies that cite this compare children of two-parent homes to children of single-parent homes. Those studies did not compare children of spouses of straight couples to children of gay and lesbian couples. Basically, all of the US leading mainstream medical and education and psychological associations overwhelmingly agree that children of gay and lesbian couples fare just as well as children of straight couples. It's quite horrendous that we're even doing studies in the wrong kind of way to prove that children grow up right, or when they were brought up by same-sex couples. Has anyone got any questions so far? I'm nearly coming to the end of my notes on this section. Does anyone know the connection between the overturning of the Doma Defence of Marriage Act in 1996? Sorry, it was signed in 96, then it was overturned in 2013. And we're seeing the progression of it now with the same-sex legislation bill that Elderman mentioned. Does anyone understand the difference? What's going to change when this goes ahead, this legislation bill? It's going to be interesting.
What is Section 1? Did we cover Section 1?
No, the most important ones are Section 3 and Section 2.
Because
So-
Section 1 only explained the name.
Only explain it. Okay, so it's not relevant anyway. So when you say overturned, I know when you look at it, it says they make it legally, they use other words, but I presume that means that it can't be used from there onwards. It's legally not binding anymore. So when you say overturned, it really is overturned.
It is overturned, but it's not put into law, is it? The only thing that's put into law is that governments and states have to recognise the marriages, and they give them back their benefits.
Right.
Are we talking about the UK or the United States?
United States.
United States.
We're always talking about the United States. That's prophecy. That's where we look to. Well, what are you saying, Emma?
I was just wondering whether that actually, I was trying to look at the legal jargon when they said it's, you say it's overturned. They ruled it was unconstitutional or legally devoid. That's what the Supreme Court decided. So does that mean from there on, that law does not really hold any water, and they can't, no state can say, well, this is what Doma says. because the Supreme Court's kind of overruled it by saying it's unconstitutional and it's legally devoid. So if tomorrow the Supreme Court turned around and said, we decide actually it's not unconstitutional, we're going to bring it back in, can they do that?
I think they can, because it's not in federal law, is it? It's not enshrined in federal law. So it's still quite dangerous, a bit like Roe v. Wade. They didn't enshrine that into federal government, so that's why they were able to overturn it.
Yeah, that's looking. Is that what this law is trying to do? I'm guessing, respect of marriage.
So if we think about the same-sex legislation bill that's going through at the moment, they got votes, I think it was 62 votes to 47, which is really good. So that means Republicans have voted for this legislation bill for same-sex marriages to be recognised by federal law, enshrined into law. It's quite good to get 62-47. I'm not sure what type of Republicans actually voted for that, but anyway. So if this goes through, I don't know whether it's next year or if it's coming up in December. Is it December, the legislation bill, Emma?
Yeah, I think they're discussing it in December, yeah. They're hoping.
What, sorry?
I think they must be hoping to get it through, at least obviously before 2024. We know that. For the next election. But I think it should be this year, I think. That's what they were saying. I thought that's what, I'll double check. I don't know. I think they're discussing it December 7th. I don't think that means they'll actually pass it through.
Yeah, it might be 2023, but you never know. What's the difference then? Can someone tell me what's the difference between just leaving it the way it is like this? You know, they're getting all the benefits now. States are recognising same-sex marriages. You know, what's the difference if this same-sex marriage legislation bill is enshrined into federal law? I'm not great on this either, so I'm just throwing it out there. I think the difference, like we said, would be that every state, not just certain states, every state has to recognise same-sex marriages and give all the benefits that heterosexual couples get. We've mentioned a few here. There's many, of course, we know. You know, so I think that's what it would mean, that it can't be overturned. They can't, one state can't say, I'm not gonna do, you know, give these or whatever. So I think that's the difference. And I think once it's enshrined into federal law, I think we talked about, we weren't even sure, Emma, were we, that it could be overthrown by executive order. This legislation, I think it would be very difficult, wouldn't it? So once this is in, if this goes in the same-sex legislation bill, once this is enshrined into law, do we think it can be overturned in the future? The Sunday law, maybe?
Well, what's worrying me after you started doing this Doma thing is that isn't that just what happened with Doma? That the Supreme Court gets a case and then rules, actually, this law is unconstitutional, so we're going to scrap it. It's practically what they did when they said it was legally not binding anymore. When they accepted the case of Obergefell, Hodges, you know, Windsor and United States, they basically have to have a case that comes to the Supreme Court that then they declare that's unconstitutional, that law. So that's the way they could overthrow it. The exact way they've done this is it was a positive outcome, because we're obviously on the side of the Supreme Court that decided this was unconstitutional. But if it's a right-wing court, a right-wing Supreme Court, and this law goes in now, they only need one case to come to the Supreme Court where they could use it to overrule this law. Now, what case that would be, I don't know how they could do it, but obviously they did it with this, so I think it is possible.
I think there's a difference though, isn't there? Forgive me if I'm wrong. Well, our American friends will be dying to say something if they heard it now, but I just don't know enough about American law. But I'm sure the difference between it being signed into Congress in 1996 and then being overthrown in 2013 or struck down, Section 3, the difference, I think, is it's to do with it's actually not just signed into Congress, but it's signed into law. This legislation bill will be signed into federal law, which is a bit different than just being passed by Congress. It wasn't really signed in.
Are you saying
I
Doma
don't know
was
if it's just passed by Congress, was it? I just
was
don't know.
Doma signed into law? No,
No,
yeah,
Doma was
signed-
passed by
Doma-
Congress, but what's the difference between Congress and federal law?
Okay, it says the Defense of Marriage Act is a United States federal law passed by the 104th United States Congress and signed into law by President Bill Clinton. So he puts the rubber stamp on it, but when it's gone through Congress like that, that's how they make federal law. So it's gone through both houses and then to the president, and all three groups signed it off, so it became federal law.
So then it becomes legal.
Exactly, so it becomes
And
legal.
it cannot be overturned.
Except with a case that comes to the Supreme Court, like Windsor versus USA, and the Supreme Court says, this is unconstitutional, we're going to scrap it, which is basically what they did for Section 2, and then or Section 3, was it? And then they scrapped the next section 2 years later with Obergefell and Hodges, didn't they? So it took 2 cases to come to the Supreme Court, and they scrapped it. But
So that means people who were married, gay people who were married, that wasn't seen anymore as a marriage. And then they had all their rights and everything taken away from them.
well, some states didn't recognize marriage anyway, did they? So
No,
it was
yeah,
very much
some
on a
didn't.
state. I don't know if it was some states accepted homosexual marriage, I assume, before this, and some didn't, but it wasn't federal law either way. But this confirmed federal law saying across all states, we don't recognize homosexual marriage. So this was a kick in the teeth, really, wasn't it?
Wow.
What you're saying was the kick in the teeth, Emma?
Is that before this point, before 1996, there were some states, weren't there, that endorsed homosexual marriage, that did have, you could legally get married in the United States, couldn't you? I'm assuming. And that's why Doma comes in and then says, no, we're not going to recognize any marriages and we're not going to give any benefits. So if you're a state that already, I don't know.
No, Doma was signed into law by Bill Clinton, the Congress. What they said was only one man and woman. That's how they define marriage.
But before that, homosexuals could get married, couldn't they, in some states? I'm assuming.
Yeah, you're right. It allowed some states to refuse or recognize same-sex marriage that were granted in other states. So like we said about Obergefell and Hodges, you had to go to another state maybe where it wasn't accepted in your own state. So yeah, you're right.
I think it started with the case in Hawaii. So of course, if they would allow them to get married in Hawaii, that was already a threat for people. So then Doma was signed, or like Doma came into the place because they mobilized and fight against it.
So that was, do you know what year that was, Magda?
91 or 2. And it was before 96.
And that's quite a significant year, 91 and 92, or 1991 in our movement. It's the increase of knowledge.
So that was the first legally recognized marriage in Hawaii?
I think it was 3 couples who were I can't completely remember, but I know that was the threat.
I just Googled it. Okay, go on.
That was the threat where because that was taken in Hawaii to the Supreme Court. And I think that was the threat where other states would have to recognize it. So then Doma came into the place.
Okay, so that was kind of a backlash to some places allowing it. So they said, okay, we're just going to make a law that we don't allow it. But when I just Googled it, and it says the availability of legally recognized same-sex marriage in the USA expanded from one state, Massachusetts, in 2004 to all 50 states in 2015. So 2004, it says, was the first legally recognized. But then it says civil rights campaign in support with distinction of sex began in the 1970s. And in the 1972, the Supreme Court declined to become involved. The issue became prominent from 1990. Okay, so yeah, it was Hawaii, 1993, when it was ruled that it was unconstitutional under the Constitution of Hawaii to abridge marriage on the basis of sex. So they kind of threw it out. And then
But it was only struck down in 2013.
Yeah, but it was all agitating until 1993. When that happened in Hawaii, that's why 1996 with Doma happens, because it's kind of backlash from Hawaii doing it, because Hawaii law says it's okay to have homosexual marriage, and they say you can't be prejudiced against them. So Doma comes in and says, no, we don't recognize marriage between a man and a man, etc.
That's my worry, exactly that point. It's my worry. It's when this same-sex marriage legislation bill is enshrined into federal law in 2023.
Yeah.
Or 2022, but probably 2023. That means we're going to get a backlash from that. And that backlash from the Republicans will be, let's make a law saying no same-sex marriage at all. There's one other thing before I stop. I think it's, where did I put it? It was about the reason that they're getting this same-sex marriage legislation bill into federal law, which is a big deal to get it into law, is because they put in about, because there was a big ooh-ah about religion as well, you know, and what I've got here, it says what they put into this bill was to protect religion. It protects religious liberty and conscience protections available under the Constitution of federal law, including not limited to Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and prevents the bill from being used to diminish or repeal any such protection. So there's some protection in this bill with regards to those who religious or non-profit religious organizations will not be required to provide any services, facilities or goods, goods for the solemnization or celebration of marriage. So non-profit companies won't have to abide by, you know, like the baking the cake situation. We've had that, mention that. Guarantees that the bill may not be used to deny or alter any benefit or right status of an otherwise eligible person or any exempt state tax treatment. So basically just wanted to mention that I think they got a high vote on this same-sex legislation bill, religious stance, and a lot of, I suppose, Republicans, you know, will vote for it. But I think, you know, who were those Republicans? I can imagine the far right really being a backlash if that bill does go into federal law. Any questions before I just summarize? Or anything to add?
It's interesting, respect for marriage law. I think it was 2009 when the man who wanted to push it, and Bill Clinton supported him, started to agitate that respect for marriage to try and make it legally binding. And look how long it's taking to do that.
Yeah, these things take a long time, don't they? You can see it's nearly all our movement when you think about it.
Yeah. So 2009, they start to try and say, let's make it federal law that gays can get married, or that homosexuals can get married. And we're still 2022 and it's not federal law. And now they're pushing it again, respect for marriage, and it's gone through. And I had another question. I don't know if this is slightly off the point, but when the Congress...
The votes have gone through there, by the way. It's not gone through to law yet.
No, it's just gone through. It's gone through Congress and Senate.
Yeah, the voting, yeah. And
really, that's just now what has to, I assume just president endorsement, isn't it? Because that seems to be what happened with this one, but it may be more complicated than that. But I'm just wondering, on this issue of this one, the Doma, Clinton doesn't agree with it, but if you're in a position of president and the House and the Senate pass a bill or pass a law, then that's the majority of the people's wishes, isn't it? And as a leader,
I think he was pressured.
Don't you have to go with the majority? But even as an ethical dilemma, as us sitting here, wouldn't we say that if a church says we want to do this, doesn't the pastor have to say, okay, then you can do it because I'm not in charge, I'm not a dictator, therefore I have to let you do the will of the people, basically. So say he's a Sabbath keeper and the will of the people is let's pass Sunday, he shouldn't then step in and say, no, we're going to keep Sabbath because my viewpoint is this, even if he thinks it's ethically not correct. Should he not have signed it or should he have signed it? I'm not saying I've got a a definitive answer on that one. Did people see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
But if he's
yeah.
got the last, I mean, if he makes the last decision, then he's got every right to say what he thinks is ethical.
Yeah.
Yes,
he
as
doesn't
one
have
person,
to.
so that the will of the people, if the majority of the people want to go the other way, can he then step
But
in?
I think he's got to weigh out, weigh up everything and then make a decision about it.
Yeah, and I think that's
why
what he
he's
did,
president,
which is,
isn't it?
yeah,
And
I
he
think he
basically
did
got the will of the
read
people, even though he himself
Clinton.
didn't agree with it.
Sorry,
Go
Emma.
on. No, I'm just wondering if he just did the will of the people because he was doing the will of the people, and he didn't agree with it, or whether he was just pressured into it and did want it was political reasons he did it. I don't know with Bill Clinton, but I'm just wondering if it was what it was with him and what the ethical position would
He
be.
actually, I believe he had friends who were very disappointed in him and couldn't understand why he signed.
Yeah, because he had gay friends.
Yeah, elders went through that. And I think she was saying that he did pass before even some law that gay people can go to a military.
Yes, I remember her
So he
doing.
was for it, but because 96 was year of election.
Yeah. He
Yeah.
wanted to be re-elected, didn't he?
So yeah, so he was afraid that would affect that, so that's why he signed it.
And it was a few years later, him and Hillary said that they're for same-sex marriage, but that was probably after they were re-elected.
Yeah.
So let me just summarize. So we've talking about the overturning of Doma, the Defence of Marriage Act. Firstly, let's just mention it was Doma was passed by Congress in 1996. They defined marriage as between one man and one woman, allowed states to refuse or recognize same-sex marriage granted under other states. And it was signed by Bill Clinton, president of that time in 1996. So that was when it was passed by Congress. Then it was overturned. The Defence of Marriage Act was overturned, and same-sex marriage couples ended up getting the same protections as heterosexual couples. We went through some things like veteran benefits, housing, health insurance, retirement savings, widow, if you're a widow, whatever you get then, social security. And then we talked about the section of the Act which was struck down, which was Section 3, and this was, I think, in 2013. And it was struck down because they believed it violated the Constitution under the Equal Protection Promise, it violated the due process of the Fifth Amendment. And there was a landmark case, wasn't there, that we talked about. It was United States versus Windsor, which was Edith Windsor, with regards to the estate that was left of $363,000. She was married to someone called, I think, was it Thea Pierce? I've got it written down. And then we went from there. Magda mentioned Section 2, and we talked about at the time in 1996, Section 2 was not challenged. I mean, at the time, sorry, of 2013, when Section 3 was struck down, Section 2 was not challenged, and that was about other states having to recognise marriages in the state that persons come back from. Say they went to marry somewhere else and where they lived, states didn't have to recognise their marriage. But that was overturned by a landmark case called Obergefell versus Hodges in 2015. That was a case Eltest brought to our attention, and that was where they were on the plane, and I think it was Hodges who was, not Hodges, Obergefell. I can't remember the gentleman's name. He was dying of cancer, partner, and they flew to another state to get their marriage recognised. Then we talked a little bit about the same-sex legislation bill that we know that's flying about at the moment in the press. And they had a big vote on that, which I think it was 67 votes to 57. Don't quote me on that. 47. So it was quite a good vote. And they're wanting that to be signed into federal law, enshrined into federal law. And that's coming up, I think, in December this year to see if that can happen. So that's all we sort of put on the board. I'm sure there's lots more. I think Magda mentioned Hawaii as well. What did you say about that, Magda? What year was that? Was that 2009?
No, that was much earlier. Hawaii was the threat. That's why Doma started.
Right.
So
Yeah,
there
like a
was, I think,
backlash.
93, I think.
couples who wanted get married and their marriage to be recognized. There was also Lamba. I can't remember. They meant to represent them, but they refused. So some men did represent them. So yeah, I think that was, I don't know, 91, 92, or Emma said, I think 93. And
Okay.
that was the threat. So that's why Doma after.
And we get the backlash, don't we? And I think that's why this is very significant in the case with this new legislation bill going in. If it does go in, which has got a lot of votes, will we get a backlash at the Sunday law of this being overturned completely? A bit like Roe versus Wade. Any other questions before we finish? Thank you for your contribution, because I didn't have enough time to study it thoroughly.
I have a quick question for Magda. I know she's quoting Elder Tess talking about this. Can you tell me when she did that, and when was it just her that talked about Doma, or was it Elder Permida as well?
So I went over it a few times, but I went over it today just because Natalie asked us to do so, and she talked about it from the second presentation, basically.
Oh, when was second presentation? When? Sorry.
From the second presentation, I think she started talking about that. So she goes through the waymarks. So
Yeah, which year? What date? Sorry, I didn't hear the date. Second presentation of a series.
In Hawaii. So it started in 1991 in Georgia, and then Hawaii is straight afterwards.
No, I think she's mentioned about the videos, Magda.
Sorry?
When Elder Tess spoke about Doma, when did Elder Tess speak about Doma?
Yeah. USA. Let me see 1 second. When was the presentation? Yeah.
Yeah.
What?
1 second. I should have it open somewhere.
Don't worry, you can actually message someone afterwards about that.
You can tell me afterwards. That's fine.
Yeah, I think we're going to close. Well, thank you so much for your contribution. I know you're busy and you've come with different things that I had as well, so that's really helpful.
I'll say one thing. I think yeah, I think it's amazing how we are already familiar with a lot of these things because Elder Tess has told us about, Windsor versus United States and Obergefell. And if we hadn't done all that, we wouldn't have a clue with this marriage law, what's going on, I don't think. And it's just amazing how it's all coming to a head, what we've been looking at, I think.
Yeah, we wouldn't have seen it, would we? It
No.
Just like going back, in 1996, who was looking externally at what was going on? I know we did notice same-sex marriage issue with Obama in 2015, but we didn't think it was prophetic, did we? Prophetic, we thought it was, the movement thought it was not a good thing. Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
That was 2015, not that long ago. So we had a lot of catching up to do, and praise God for sending Midnight Messenger to open our eyes and how wonderful this is.
Amen.
And it is wonderful. What a wonderful God we worship. On that note, I think we will finish with prayer. If you want to turn the recording off, Emma, thank you so much.